All right, everybody, thank you for joining us for our September online program at the Center for Railroad Photography and Art. I'm Lisa Hardy and I'm the program administrator here at the center. Thank you for logging on with us this evening. Tell us in the comments where you're joining us from. Tonight, I'm joining from Janesville, Wisconsin. Following the main presentation, we will be hosting a Q&A session. If you have a question at any point during today's presentation, make sure you post it in the Q&A, not the chat, to ensure that we can see it. Welcome to our members who are joining us this evening. Your membership and confidence have helped enable almost 30 years of CRP&A success in preserving, presenting, and celebrating Railroad's rich visual history and legacy. We thank you. In this Roncy Hill collection image, a Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway coal train charges across the plains at Reno Junction, Wyoming on August 25, 1997. To sustain our work for the immediate future and to chart our course for years to come, we are asking for your continued support. If you are able, please consider making a special contribution as we head into the fall season. There are many ways to support the center, each offering unique benefits. You can visit our website at www.railphoto-art.org/support for more information about these benefits. Tonight, I'd like to spotlight non-cash gifts. We welcome gifts of appreciated securities, including stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. These non-cash gifts can offer significant tax advantages. If you have any questions about these types of gifts, please contact our development director, Inga Velton, at inga@railphoto-art.org. Gifts to the center will have immediate effective use, fueling our efforts to make improvements to our preservation environment, digitize photographic collections, publish upcoming issues of Railroad Heritage, produce upcoming online programming like tonight, and so much more. With your continued support, we can ensure that the captivating story of railroading, preserved through our collections, continues to inspire and educate for generations to come. I'd also like to welcome everyone who is joining us for the first time tonight. We are so grateful you're here. Allow me to briefly introduce the center. We are the Center for Railroad Photography and Art. Our mission is to preserve and present significant images of railroading. A large portion of our funding comes directly from the support of our members. Annual membership is just $50 and includes various benefits. One of these benefits is 4 issues of our quarterly journal, Railroad Heritage. The final issue for 2025 has recently been sent in the mail. Because we are celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, I felt it was important to spotlight an article in this issue called Steam's Final Hour, Where It All Began, by Justin Franz, and includes photographs from the Victor Hand collection at the center. Justin's words paired with Victor's photographs is exceptional. Become a member today and we'll make sure that this issue is sent to you. Tonight, we're here to celebrate the 200th anniversary of England's historic Stockton and Darlington Railway, the first railway to operate freight and passenger service with steam traction. This seemed like such a big occasion, I wasn't certain the best way to celebrate. Have any of our audience members found ways to celebrate? I'd love to learn in the chat how you're celebrating this anniversary. My first thoughts turned to creating a hat in the style of My Fair Lady, with an actual steaming miniature of Locomotion No. 1 on it. Initial attempts did not go well after an unfortunate incident using dry ice to create steam. Plan B sent me to Google, and lo and behold, there was a 16-minute video on YouTube called How to Celebrate Railway 200 in 2025. I couldn't believe my luck. I first learned that in January 2025, there was a whistle up, where various heritage railways and current railroads throughout the world blew their whistles and horns. Then I found out that Art UK has curated a list of 200 artworks featuring the UK railway that were stunning. Truly, the art of railroads is so captivating. My favorite find was the special merchandise on sciencemuseum.org.uk. The ticket archive products were especially cool. What a fun deep dive. After learning more about how to celebrate, I figured the best thing I could do would be to bring someone who could help me learn more. I learned that Dutch Tubman was perfect for the job. Dutch was born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1951, and his interest in railroads was ignited after a family trip on the New York Central when he was 3 years old. Prior to his sophomore year of high school, Dutch's family moved to the Chicago area, making it possible for him to enjoy pre-Amtrak passenger trains there. After earning an undergraduate degree in education from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh in 1975, Dutch spent the next 11 years teaching school in Wisconsin and Wyoming. He also spent a year working on a master's degree from Utah State University in Logan, Utah. In 1986, he and his family moved from Wyoming to Knoxville, Tennessee, where he earned an MBA in Transportation and Marketing from the University of Tennessee. Hired by Norfolk Southern in 1988, Dutch spent the next 31 years working in various departments that included economics, metals marketing, car management, transportation, shortline marketing, and coal marketing. After retiring in 2019, Dutch and his wife Pamela Hale moved from Norfolk to Elon College, North Carolina, where he spends part of his time working as a station attendant at the Amtrak station in Burlington, North Carolina. Dutch, let's celebrate the S&D in style. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay.
All
See if
right.
I let's see if I can get it to come up here. Just a second, please.
Yeah.
All right. The title of my presentation is Lynchpin: The Long Road to the Opening of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. A linchpin is a person or a thing vital to an enterprise or organization. The one thing I'd like to get across this evening is I truly, as I've looked into this, the Stockton and Darlington was truly the linchpin of the railroad, modern network of railroads that we enjoy, throughout the world. It all started there. But first, we're going to take a trip back and discuss the advent of overland commercial travel in Great Britain. The forerunner of the first commercial railroad in the UK was the stagecoach traveling over a fixed route, the first of which traveled from Edinburgh to Leith in 1610. These coaches ran on the first of each month, taking 10 days in the summer and 12 days in the winter. Unlike the American stagecoach, the first British versions were little more than covered wagons drawn by 4 horses. Travel on these early stagecoach services was brutal. There was little protection from the weather, especially for second-class riders who had to travel on top. The ride was very rough with accompanying soreness and motion sickness. Also, these services were subject to breakdowns as well as attacks by highwaymen. A 2.0 version of commercial land travel was the flying coach, a limited stop, same day stagecoach which made its debut between Oxford and London in 1764. These coaches traveled or flew at speeds of up to 8 miles per hour. So while unpleasant by contemporary standards, stagecoaches were still a more comfortable way to travel as compared to riding in an ox cart or walking. Soon a series of stagecoach routes using London as a hub radiated out across Great Britain. The evolution of steam power. Around the start of scheduled stagecoaches, and in a seemingly unrelated event, a Frenchman, Salomon de Caus, had published an article in 1615 laying out the concept of a steam-driven pump. This, as well as some of his later writings, specifically one referring to steam-driven transport, helped him land a spot in a French insane asylum. Edward Somerset, the second Marquis of Worcester, visited Salomon de Caus in the asylum and returned to England, enthused with the idea of a steam engine. In 1663, using the barrel of a cannon, he designed a water-commanding engine to pump water. The invention was quickly derided as, at best, a toy, and forgotten for several decades. In his will, the discouraged Marquis requested that a model of his engine be buried with him. 200 years later, in 1861, a scientific search was made of the then rehabilitated Marquise's coffin, but no model was discovered. Savory, a Cornish mining engineer, is credited with developing and patenting the first practical steam engine in 1698. Known as a steam pump or a Savory engine, it was designed to pump wastewater out of mines. A decade later, Thomas Newcomen improved on Savory's design in 1712 by using a piston to drive a pump that filled up with wastewater. Within the next decade, hundreds of Newcomen's pumps were in use throughout British mines. Now, somewhat mistakenly, James Watt has been called the father of the steam engine. As indicated by the previous slides, this wasn't quite the case. However, James Watt and his business partner did make substantial and patented improvements to Newcomen's engine in 1765, thus paving the way for the eventual development of a steam carriage. Meanwhile, back in France, Nicolas Joseph Cugnon constructed the first steam-powered vehicle. Entitled a Fermière de Vapeur, or steam carriage, a full-size version was introduced in 1770. The above prototype carried 4 passengers and moved at a speed of 2.5 miles per hour. Unfortunately, in addition to its tortoise-like speed, it needed to have both its fire relit and its steam pressure restored every 15 minutes. In addition, because of the large boiler centered on its front, the steam carriage's weight was significantly unbalanced, making operation of the vehicle unwieldy. During a test drive in Paris, the contraption got away from the inventor and crashed into a wall, thus causing the first mechanical vehicle traffic accident. Eventually, it was pronounced to be impractical, as in a menace, and was subsequently retired. I think Monsieur Cugnon did not want to follow Salomon de Caus to an insane asylum. In 1784, William Murdoch, an associate of James Watt, created a more practical version of the steam carriage. Interestingly, Watt pleaded with Murdoch not to pursue development of his steam carriage, but thankfully this was advice Murdoch chose to ignore. There are 2 theories about this. First of all, that James Watt, even though he had considered the conceptual idea of a steam carriage, never actually developed one. And when Murdoch comes along, develops one, and James Watt thinks the whole idea is ridiculous, it's going to be ridiculed, and it doesn't want the whole idea of steam engines to be ridiculous. Or James Watt, realizing Murdoch has made a lot of work on this, has kind of discouraged him from developing it, while he, Watt, could maybe develop his own advanced one. In another chronicle of early steam-driven vehicles running amok, one evening, while Murdoch was out testing a model of his device, it got away from him on a local road where it approached a clergyman out for a walk. Seeing this hissing monster belching steam and flames and moving quickly towards him out of the dark, the terrified cleric took off across a field and into a nearby village, where he told those he encountered he had just been accosted by the devil. Okay, so what is the first steam-powered railway locomotion? In 1802, Richard Trevithick, a Cornish miner, early humorist, and a pupil of William Murdoch, took out a patent for a high-pressure steam carriage designed for country roads. On one of his nocturnal trips around the countryside, Trevithick and a companion stopped just short of inadvertently running his contraption through a toll barrier. When Trevithick asked what the toll charge was, the terrified collector replied, "There is nothing to pay, my dear Mr. Devil. Please do drive on now as fast as you can." Trevithick went on to develop a railway locomotive, and in 1804, an unmanned Trevithick locomotive hauled the first steam-powered train on the then horse-powered Penydarren tram road. We're going to discuss tram roads and wagonways here a little later. While the locomotive performed successfully in pulling 10 tons of iron bar at 5 miles per hour, its severe jerking motion tore up the cast iron track, and it was deemed to be an impractical failure. Nonetheless, with the running of this first unit, Trevithick became rightfully known as the father of the steam locomotive. Later, in 1808, Trevithick went on to develop an amusement park-like ride in London, offering fare-paying passengers a ride behind his Catch Me Who Can locomotive, going around a circular track built near what is now London's Union Station. This exhibit, however, had been built on swampy land and could not support the ongoing daily weight of the locomotive. Working to make Trevithick's design more practicable, John Blenkinsop of London, working with Matthew Murray, designed the Salamanca, a five-wheel locomotive in 1811. The Salamanca's four unflanged wheels supported the weight of the apparatus, while a fifth outer cogwheel carried the locomotive along on an adjacent cogged rail. And it's kind of hard to tell here, but you've got the four locomotives that are running on basically an L-shaped piece of rail, the outside of the rail, and then the cog rail here is kind of pulling the thing along. Blenkinsop and Murray's locomotive was quickly duplicated. It and similar units were put to work on the 3.5-mile Middleton Railway near Leeds, where they routinely hauled as many as 30 chaldron wagons, rail cars carrying coal, at a speed of 3.5 miles per hour. Unfortunately, the Salamanca blew up in 1818 after its driver tampered with the safety valves, casting a temporary pall on the public's perception of adhesion or traveling steam locomotives. Going back a ways, in 1748, the Wylam Wagonway added wooden rails to move coal 8 miles from the Wylam Colliery to Leamington on the River Tyne. In 1812, its owner, Christopher Blackett, replaced the wooden rails with the L-shaped cast iron rail. If you can see on the left, note that these are 3-foot sections of rail with no joint bars connecting them, and that the car wheels are designed to move on the outer edge of the rail. One of Christopher Blackett's mechanical engineers, Thomas Headley, went on to build a locomotive that would not tear up the newly laid cast iron rails on the Wylam Wagonway. The result was a prototype unit called the Puffing Billy. Following recent tradition, Puffing Billy was spotted one night by an unwary traveler who, upon seeing this apparition traveling towards him, leaped a hedge and reported to all he saw his vision of a terrible devil. This event caused much public ridicule of Christopher Blackett, who did not have a sense of humor about the whole thing. However, Blackett persevered, and by 1814, Puffing Billy and his brother, the Wylam Dilly, went into regular service at the hauling coal to the docks at Leamington on Tyne. The Wylam Wagonway was the first working railway in the world to use traveling or adhesion locomotives, engines that were not dependent upon cables or cogs. And in case anyone wonders if the British have lost their ability to provide quirky names for locomotives, I give you and rest my case. A Tale of Two Coalfields, the Newcastle and South Durham coal districts. Coal mining in Britain is reported to have begun in Roman times, due to both the proximity of easily mined coal deposits as well as accessibility to the River Tyne. Newcastle on Tyne became its epicenter. By 1338, the Newcastle district is reported to have shipped more than 15,000 tons of coal annually, much of it export coal for London. Now, in my 10 years in the coal business group at Norfolk Southern, we shipped a lot of export coal. But export coal is coal that was mined in the United States, put on vessels, and sent to other countries. The only thing I could think of is that in 14th century England, the chance of a normal person living in Newcastle actually ever traveling to London was so remote it probably made London seem like another country. Now, commensurate with mining, the first primitive mining railway tracks and mine cars appeared in the 16th century. The tracks were little more than logs nailed on logs. They were designed to move coal more easily within the mines. The wheel sets of this mine car had long hubs that came out over on top of the rail logs with inner flanges to steer its path between the rail logs, not to be confused with the tie logs on the bottom. The first above ground English coal railways were called Newcastle roads, were made entirely of wood, including the rails. These short haul operations were designed to carry coal to floating platforms on the River Tyne. From there, the coal would be hand loaded onto shallow draft keel boats. This map shows the dense network of coal mines and wagonways, or Newcastle roads, in the area surrounding Newcastle in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Little wonder that Newcastle was known as the coal mining capital of Great Britain, leading to a definition of redundancy as being carrying coal to Newcastle. Thanks to ready access to the River Tyne, coal mining prospered in the Newcastle region. Looking at the diagram to the left there, you'll see Newcastle on Tyne up at top. Go down to the blue arrow, and you will see the Durham coal mining region. The large coal deposits in the Darlington and Durham areas south of Newcastle were underdeveloped because of the long distance transporting coal by road to navigable waterways near Middlesbrough. As one wag noted, no one ever spoke of carrying coal to Stockton for the simple reason it was too expensive to carry it there. In fact, roads were so poor in this part of England, coal was initially carried in large bags on the backs of horses because carts got bogged down so easily. Later, with the introduction of wooden toll and plank roads, wagons could finally be used. Eventually, some of these early highways evolved into the first coal wagonways, which depended upon both horsepower and wooden rails. This remarkable photograph was actually taken in the beginning of the 20th century. This wagonway with the horses that made it into the teens, I guess, right before or during the time of World War I. The result of all of this was that the Tees Valley region of England, the area west of Darlington and Stockton, suffered economically because of a lack of easy access to a waterway. Several canal proposals had been made during the previous century, but they did not gain any traction due to the hilly contour of the terrain, as well as the difficulty of maintaining sufficient water to keep the canal beds full. Again, a great period drawing of a canal boat being taken on a bridge over an actual navigable waterway. Projected construction costs for a 30-lock, 27-mile canal from the Auckland coal fields to Stockton came in at £205,283 with a projected annual revenue of £8,000 to £8,312. With a payback period of approximately 25 years, there was little interest by investors in putting their money into this canal. Frustrated by this, two Durham District coal operators, William James and Edward Pease, became convinced the only way to provide a reasonable mode of transport for their coal was through the construction of a railway from the Auckland Valley above Darlington to a pier on the Tees River at Stockton. Pease, a prominent Quaker, brought in several of his co-religionists to help fund the railways, which soon became known informally as the Quaker Line. Pease and James hired George Overton to do an initial survey of a railway route from Shildon to Stockton. A knowledgeable early railway and tramway builder, George Overton had been chief engineer of the Merthyr Tramroad, a Welsh tramway, when Richard Trevithick operated his first railway locomotive on it in 1804. If George Overton had a flaw in his plan, it was his inability to conceive of a railway that did not utilize horsepower. Accordingly, he conducted his first survey of the railway using curves and grades that would have been unsuitable for a traveling locomotive. In addition, Overton also made the political error of surveying his railroad through the middle of the Earl of Cleveland's fox hunting grounds. Earl of Cleveland turned out to be a formidable foe to the Stockton and Darlington Railway. Once Overton's initial survey was complete, Peace and James approached Parliament for passage of a bill approving construction. During the following 2-year period, they had to deal with numerous lawsuits and complaints brought by competitors and early NIMBYs. It wasn't until 1821 that Parliament passed the Stockton and Darlington Railway Act, which approved the surveyed route from Wilton and Etherley collieries to near Brusselton to Stockton. Interestingly, the original Stockton and Darlington Railway Act defined the operation to be an open-to-all toll railway limited to horse-drawn transportation of coal. There was no mention of either passengers or other commodities, much less steam locomotion. These strictures would change, however. The father of the railways. The Wylam Colliery Wagonway passed in front of a cottage in Wylam Town, where in 1781 a child was born who would eventually take railways from mine support operation to public thoroughfares. That child, George Stephenson, went to work at an early age in the Wylam Colliery, joining his father there. Initially illiterate from not having gone to school, George taught himself to read at the age of 18. George Stephenson also proved to be an astute observer of all things mechanical and likely saw Richard Trevithick's Catch Me Who Can locomotive in 1808 when it made a demonstration run on the Wylam Wagonway. Later, Stephenson hired on at Killingworth Colliery, where, because of his ability to improve the operation's steam-powered water pumps, he came to the attention of its owner, Lord Ravensworth. It was with Ravensworth's support that Stephenson was able to build his first traveling engine named the Blucher. Oops. The Blucher was a short-lived experimental locomotive which initially proved to be even less efficient than the existing horse-drawn cars it proposed to replace. Stephenson went on to develop a steam blast pipe which forced the escaping steam into the engine's chimney, increasing combustion in the firebox and boosting horsepower. Based on Stephenson's work at the Killingworth Railway, he was then hired to build an 8-mile railway line from the Hetton Colliery to the River Weir. The Hetton Colliery is the number 4 on the far right of the screen. You can see it goes up and down, and comes out on the left to the River Weir. Over the course of those 8 miles, the railway successfully traversed Warden Law, which is the number 2 there, one of the highest hills in the region. This was accomplished through a series of inclined planes powered by 2 stationary steam engines, pulling ropes, as well as 5 self-acting inclined planes where the descent of loaded wagons down simultaneously pulled a string of empty wagons up. Learning of George Stephenson's work in building the Hetton Colliery Railway, Edward Peace invited Stephenson to meet with him on April 19, 1821. Stephenson and his associate, Nicholas Wood, started their day by walking over 12 miles of the proposed route the morning of their meeting. During their conversation with Peace, Stephenson made a number of suggestions and soon afterwards was hired as the chief engineer of the yet to be constructed Stockton and Darlington Railway. With the assistance of his 18-year-old son Robert, George Stephenson resurveyed Overton's initial route, something Overton was not happy about when he discovered, and laid out an alternative routing that not only shaved 3 miles off of the original right-of-way, but also provided for gentler curves and less steep gradients. These changes made the Stockton and Darlington more amenable to the use of a traveling engine. Stephenson also added 1/2 inch to the 4'8", 8-inch track gauge to reduce friction on curves for the inner flanged wheels, hence our modern 4', 8.5-inch railway gauge. Now, concurrent with Stephenson's plans for the Stockton and Darlington was an 1820 patent by John Birkinshaw for malleable or wrought iron railway track. This was 28-pound rail manufactured in 15-foot lengths. It also became known as fish belly rail, which you can kind of see from the top there. Malleable rail was closer to steel and easier to weld as compared to the more brittle cast iron rails being used at the time. Learning of Birkinshaw's innovation, Stephenson changed his plans and recommended to the board of directors that only wrought iron rail be used on the Stockton and Darlington, even though he, Stephenson, had recently filed patents for improving the strength of cast iron rail. George Stephenson was a man who was not afraid to take some potential money out of his pocket if he found a better way of doing something. Edward Pease and Company now had to return to Parliament for an Act 2 that would not only approve construction over the new routing Stephenson had laid out, but would also allow for locomotion other than men or horses. This time, with parliamentary members now realizing the importance of building railways, it was a less onerous process getting approval, and the second Stockton and Darlington Railway Act was signed on May 23, 1823. Constructing the Stockton and Darlington. The first rail on the Stockton and Darlington was laid on May 23, 1822. George Stephenson had recommended the Stockton and Darlington be built only with the malleable rail, but the higher cost of this rail resulted in it only being used on half of the railroad. The remainder of the line, the horse-drawn segment from Wilton to Darlington, was laid with less expensive cast iron rail. In addition to the rail, the track components also included both chairs, which were rail fasteners, and sleepers, rectangular blocks of oak or stone that served as early railroad ties. In constructing the Stockton and Darlington, thousands of oak sleepers were imported from France for the horse-drawn portion of the railway northwest of Shildon, while locally produced stone sleepers were used from Brusselton to Stockton. As shown in this photograph, taken 4 months ago, a section of the stone sleepers have been uncovered on the Brusselton incline. And I will tell you, this is an integral part. If you're going to go visit Stockton and Darlington, it's worth the effort to hire an Uber driver to take you out to see this. It's really fascinating to see this go up towards the top of the incline. The unplanned for higher cost of the wrought iron rail was a precursor of issues that would plague George Stephenson throughout his career. In many of his later projects, railway promoters discovered the actual cost of construction was sufficiently higher than Stephenson's initial estimates. On the Stockton and Darlington, these higher costs included the purchase of the right-of-way, equipment, construction of the Brusselton incline, and salaries, in short, just about everything. These additional cost obligations proved unattainable for the Stockton and Darlington Board of Directors to meet, and it was Edward Pease who stepped up to provide the additional funds needed to complete the Stockton and Darlington. In the building of the Stockton and Darlington, some construction had been carried out on property where land ownership had not been settled. A July 1823 report to the Board of Directors admitted that, to date, only 17 miles of the full 25-mile route had been fully and legally purchased. Commensurate with the start of construction, George Stephenson and Edward Peace established Robert Stephenson and Company, a locomotive managed construction facility in Newcastle. It was here that the first 4 Stockton and Darlington steam engines were built, 2 stationary engines and 2 traveling engines, including Locomotion No. 1, which would be used for the inaugural run. Locomotion No. 1 was designed to travel up to 6 miles per hour and to be able to pull a 48-ton train at a steady 5 miles per hour. It later more than exceeded these expectations, as will be seen. A major accomplishment of the Stockton and Darlington was construction of a bridge over the River Skern. When the price of iron proved prohibitive for a metal bridge, a local Durham architect was hired to build a stone structure. This gentleman had no prior experience in bridge design, and the structure needed to be significantly reinforced 4 years later. The other major construction accomplishment of the Stockton and Darlington was construction of the Brusselton Incline near Shildon, a photograph we'd seen just a few slides ago. The incline used a stationary engine at its summit to bring up and then lower loaded coal wagons coming from the collieries at Wilton and Etherley. On September 9, 1825, the Oversight Committee, which was basically George Stephenson, wrote the shareholders stating, "The main line will be ready for public traffic by September 26th, and your committee recommends the grand opening of the railway to take place on the following day." It had cost £148,000, much higher than the original estimate of £82,000, but the Stockton and Darlington had been completed using some of the best technology of the time and at half the cost of building a canal. First run, September 27th, 1825, which we will be commemorating here in about 16 days. Several days prior to the opening of the Stockton and Darlington, engine number 1 was moved using a team of horses from Newcastle and placed on the tracks near the Brusselton Incline. Before the inauguration, it made a successful but unheralded test run between Shildon and Darlington. On September 27th, the first train festivities started at 8 o'clock at the Brusselton Incline's permanent steam engine house, where the proprietors of the Stockton and Darlington watched the ascent, then descent, of 6 loaded coal wagons down the incline to where George Stephenson was waiting at the throttle of Locomotion No. 1. The consist of the first train was as follows: Locomotion No. 1 locomotive, tender with water and coal, 5 wagons laden with coal and passengers on top, 1 wagon of flour, also with riders on top, 1 wagon with surveyors and engineers, doesn't say if they had to share the wagon with coal or not, the experiment, a coach for conveying the board of directors, the proprietors, 6 wagons with seats reserved for strangers, and I guess at this point the strangers were just friends they hadn't met yet, 14 wagons for the conveyance of the railroad workers. This was brilliant on George Stephenson's part. The navvies had worked very hard to build this. He wanted to make sure that they got recognition and took part in the celebration of the completion of this. And at the end, there were 6 further wagons of coal and passengers. This wonderful period drawing of the first train, it pretty much shows the train disappearing out of sight. Prior to departure from Shildon, crowds of people waiting to board the first train were treated to the locomotive's weight safety valve suddenly opening. The resulting release of steam had the effect of causing a free-for-all stampede by the onlookers who were fearful an explosion was imminent. When the crowd soon realized that George Stephenson and his brother James were quite unperturbed by this occurrence while working around the locomotive, the crowd returned to boarding, or I might say overboarding. Because departing from the Brusselton incline, the train continued on to the Mason Arms Public House in nearby Shildon. By this time, the allotted 300 passengers in the strangers' seats had doubled to 600. After departing Shildon, the train took 2 hours, including stops, to complete the 12-mile journey to Darlington. This painting, the opening of the Stockton and Darlington by the artist John Dobbin, was commissioned 4 years later. It conveys the sense of interest and wonderment that the first run over the Skene Bridge generated. Literally thousands of onlookers lined the entire Stockton and Darlington route between Brusselton Incline and Stockton to watch passage of the first train. Now, with the assistance of the 19th century author H.G. Wells and his time machine, we are able to bring you this early movie of the inaugural rail crossing on the Skene Bridge. Note how animated the crowd is when they see the train. After the train left Darlington, George Stephenson is reported to taking it up to 15 miles per hour, 3 times what the locomotive was supposed to be capable of. The total journey ended up taking a little over 5 hours to cover the 25-mile journey from Brusselton Incline to Stockton. And the arrival of the inaugural run on the quay or dock in Stockton signaled the advent of the first commercial steam locomotive-powered railway in the world. Postscript: the Stockton and Darlington from 1825 on. Now, 2 serious flaws on the early Stockton and Darlington were: 1, a total lack of signaling, and 2, an absence of any human oversight of the daily operations. This led to ongoing congestion and continual confrontations between the various private operators as to who had the right-of-way. It looks like these 2 gentlemen here, one of them may end up being tossed over the bridge. We don't know exactly what happened. Regular passenger service began on October 5, 1827, using a single horse pulling the Stockton and Darlington's experiment coach. Later, in 1825, the Stockton and Darlington undertook a several-year experiment of licensing individual taverns to operate their own horse-drawn rail carriages. As it turned out, tavern keepers operating their own trains eventually proved not to be a well-thought-out idea. You think so? In 1833, the Stockton and Darlington bought out the tavern operations and resumed running its own passenger service. Later that year, locomotive power passenger trains began running on a regular basis. And in 1863, the Northeastern Railway purchased the Stockton and Darlington, and the first commercial railway in the world vanished as an independent entity. The Stockton and Darlington in the 21st century. By the way, this is the magnificent British Rail station at Darlington. Worth a trip just to see it, even if you couldn't see all the other neat stuff that's around there. The lines in black on this map show the Stockton and Darlington system in 1825. The lines in red show what's in service in 2025. So you can see we've we've made some progress. Later, early in the 21st century, the British government rebuilt a portion of the original Stockton and Darlington. Today, it is known as the Bishop Auckland Line, but riding from Stockton to Darlington now requires a change of trains in Thornaby. This is the Northern Line's Bishop Auckland train in Darlington Station in May of 2025. This train will traverse a significant portion of the original right-of-way between Shildon, Darlington, and Thornaby. This is the scene if you're arriving by train at 21st century Stockton-on-Tees. As noted earlier, it was Stockton Dock that was the actual terminus of the original Stockton and Darlington. This is Shildon Station in 2025, located just north of the Locomotion Museum. And this is the Locomotion Museum in Shildon, a branch of the National Railway Museum in York. This is a must-see if you're going to be going to the UK and interested in railway history. This and the National Railway Museum, which is about 75, 90 miles from Shildon. But there's also the Hopetown Darlington nearby, which is whose focus is on early Darlington and the vicinity. It's really more of a local museum and exhibit. But it was at Hopetown Darlington that I attained the railroad-related highlight of my 2025 visit, meeting the original Locomotion No. 1. I can tell you it was pretty amazing to walk into this back room of this display and just walk up to this thing and be able to look at it and just really take it in. It was I had tears in my eyes, just looking at it. In retrospect, compared to George Stephenson's later work in building the Liverpool and Manchester, the Stockton and Darlington was a much easier construction project because, first of all, it enjoyed much greater support in the communities it was built in. It was primarily designed to carry one commodity, coal, and because there was no existing canal or high-density carriage traffic between Stockton and Darlington, there was virtually no opposition from stagecoach companies and canal boat operators. Celebrating the anniversary of the opening of Stockton and Darlington has been a 9-month festival taking place throughout England's Durham and Tees Valley in 2025 as part of Railway 200, including the very interesting experiment with the dry ice on the hat, which I certainly would have hoped we'll get to see a picture of at some point. So I'm going to close off here with a promotional video of the put together by Railway Stockton Darlington 200. I'm hoping you're going to be able to hear the sound on this, but it may be a work in progress. We'll see.
2025 is the 200th anniversary of modern railway. To be exact, it's been 200 years since Stockton and Darlington.
And that is it. So thank you all very much. I'm going to go back to where I can see the rest of the people.
All right, Dutch. That was so fun. Well done. Oh my goodness. Your
You
dry sense
know,
of humor
what
kept
was
me
funny about it,
out.
what was funny about it was I couldn't see a thing. I had no idea if I was just talking to myself for the last 45 minutes or not, but I'm glad you were able to see it.
Yes. In fact, Daniel shared in the comments that his best friend in the UK could trace his lineage to Trevithick, and he's really looking forward to sharing your presentation with his friend with all of your information. I thought that
No,
was,
and that's great because the more I discovered about Richard Trevithick, what an amazing man. Uh, yeah, I won't even go into it, but I've certainly considered that for a future presentation.
yeah, it was so wonderful. Elrond, I'm sure you're just blown away as well.
Oh yeah, that was really fun, Dutch. Thank you so much. And plus, we got to see names like Puffing Dragon and all kinds, all the color and craziness of that era. That was really fun. Thank you.
It was kind of a predecessor to the movie The Exorcist in so many ways because of all the devil sightings. So,
That's right. Oh man, it was. Now we know where they got their inspiration from. I was just curious, what got you into all of this? What sparked your interest in this era?
I would like to acknowledge my charming wife who's been sitting here next to me during this entire thing. She doesn't want to be shown, but she has been here kind of helping me out. And she found a book in a used bookcase, a British book from the 1920s, brought it home. And the second story in it was the Stockton and Darlington. And, I had just a very cursory knowledge. I mean, I had no idea where Stockton or Darlington was. I didn't really understand any of it. But just by reading that one story, I thought this is a story that's really worth seeing. And then in 2019, during a trip at the Lexington on the Cumbres and Toltec, there was a couple from Great Britain who were with the Railroad 200 group. They actually invited the Lexington group to come to Great Britain for the 200th anniversary. Kind of when what we found out was there were literally hundreds of thousands of people converging on Great Britain as we speak, and Pamela and I made the decision, as did the Lexington group. The Lexington group finally decided it was just going to be too much trouble to try to get everything set up for that particular time, but they encouraged their individual members to go. And Pamela and I did that very thing in May of this year. So I hope that answers your question.
Oh, absolutely. Your passion comes shining through. It was very fun. I especially love that you finally got to meet the locomotion and snap a picture. So,
Yeah,
uh,
it was it was
what a
it was
moment.
it was great. I was trying to figure out why they didn't have like four guards around it, but this is Great Britain. They had a lady docent standing over in the corner, and that was it. Nobody was going to bother it and
Oh, see,
spray paint it or anything.
no one would have noticed if you had just, had that as a check-in on your bag going back, right?
Yeah,
Fine.
right.
Well,
The funny thing about the locomotion, if I can just make one point, that thing travels all over Great Britain. I don't know if you picked up on it, but Richard Trevithick kind of came up with the original traveling locomotive. Where these, have these small steam engines that go from, one heritage railroad to another. Well, he did the same thing with the Catch Me Who Can, as well as his first one. He took it all over Great Britain, and that's what the locomotion does today. I was just lucky. The locomotion spends its time between the National Railway Museum in York, the Science Museum in London, and the Locomotion Museum in Chilton, as well as Stockton Darlington. I was just fortunate enough to actually, be in the same place it was in.
oh,
That's
that's
awesome.
wonderful that you got to see it. I love that.
Yes.
Well, Dutch, we do have some questions. Scott, did you want to ask any of those questions or would you like me to take over?
Oh, sure. Well, Dutch, a couple of technical questions. One asks about braking on those early trains. How were they braked?
That's a wonderful question. I can kind of answer how it worked some of the early railways in Great Britain. On those cars, I am not sure that those coal cars, those chaldron wagons, actually had braking, and I have found no reference whatsoever to the presence of brakemen on each car. So at this point, I'm just going to have to say that Locomotion #1 just kind of did the whole thing. There's an interesting side story to it. George Stephenson was awake more than one night before the first run of the Locomotion #1. If anybody realized all the things that could go wrong on this first trip, it was Stephenson. And they really hadn't gone very far out of Shildon when they had their first mishap. They had a car that went bad ordered, and this is how they dealt with it. They got some volunteers. They picked the car up off the rails, put it to the side, recoupled the train, and went on. So, but there were a couple instances where George Stephenson had to stop and do some minor repairs. But all in all, he did great. Now, if you may remember in the when they talked about Robert Stephenson and Company, Stockton and Darlington had two adhesion or traveling locomotives. The Locomotion was the first one. The second one, I can't think of the name, but the second one showed up like a week or two later. It was a disaster. They couldn't do anything right, and the thing had to be sent back to Newcastle to basically be rebuilt. So there was a lot of luck that went into the very successful first run of the Locomotion and the first train.
And I mean, would you say the Locomotion #1 was better than expected to be? I mean, that first train was enormous. I mean, in both
No, it was, and I
and
saw there was a question about how much it weighed, and I guess I could probably take my take a pen and try to figure out an estimate on what it might have weighed, but I certainly don't have that answer off the top of my head.
Someone in the chat says they had to drop anchor whenever they stopped.
Oh, okay. Wouldn't surprise me at all.
Dutch, do you have any sense of when they started to do a little bit more on the operations side? I mean, in terms of, adding any sort of human oversight to the train operations?
Well, I can only imagine what the whole thing was like when you had these individual wagon guys with had wagons that could operate over rails, going against each other with not a double track railroad.
Right.
There were certainly passing sidings, but as you can saw, it was kind of first come, first served. But then in the middle of this mix, you throw in these tavern operations.
Right.
And the only thing I can think of these tavern coaches are like is if you've gone to Charleston or Savannah and you see these folks driving along, about 25 people cycling, and drinking beers as they go along. That's kind of what I think these really tavern coaches were like. So it really was very much of a free for all. But eventually, by 1833 or so, I guess the railroad decided that we really needed to take our destiny into our own hands, and eventually they got rid of the individual wagon operators and also the tavern coaches. But it took a while. It was the first one. They didn't know exactly how it was going to work because it was the first public railway. Up to that point, there had been a few railways like the one in Middleton, but they controlled everything. All it did was handle coal, from the colliery to the river and back.
We had a great comment in the chat too about the braking situation, noting that the John Bull locomotive was also built without brakes, and that the philosophy was that the steam engine was there to pull the train, not to stop the train. Pierre Lacombe, thanks for that great comment. That's perfect.
Yeah, I would be interested to know what the slack was like at the end of that.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully they weren't going that fast, but even at 5 miles an hour, that'd give you some whiplash back there on the last car.
Exactly.
But there were actually two people on the locomotive, George Stephenson and his brother James, and I'm assuming that James was the brakeman. So
Right.
Probably so.
And Dutch Paul Hensler asks just another famous early locomotive, if you've ever seen the Adler, the German National Rail Museum, one that's kind of similar to Locomotion #1.
that's a great question. One of the things I try to I try to point out in my longer presentation was the French were nipping at the heels of the British. The British got there first, but the French had their railway system up and running within just a couple of years of the British, and it was just amazing. So no, I have not heard of the Abler, and I don't know anything about the French other than the initial, the first Salomon de Caus and Nicolas Cugnon. Beyond them, I can't really tell you when it came in, but they were very close behind.
Well, the Adler was actually a German locomotive. I guess that's
right.
German.
Yeah, I'm assuming the Germans were behind the French, but maybe they weren't.
Right. Well, no, it all seemed to happen very fast,
Mm-hmm.
And another question too on a technical aspect about the gauge. I mean, I know you said they added the 1/2 inch to get out to 4 feet 8.5, but do you have any sense of how they landed at 4 feet 8 inches prior to that?
Well, I was taught at some point that it was, the railway gauge came about from the Roman chariot ruts, in London and all the other places, and supposedly that has been debunked, but I'm not sure if it has been or not. So I guess I really don't know where the 4 foot 8 inch gauge came. I'm not sure what the gauges were for the colliery railroads, the Killington, the Hetton colliery railways, the Middleton railroads. That would be something good to go back and check, see if I can find out what the gauges were. It may be that they just took 4 foot 8 inches because that's what the Middleton Railroad used.
Right.
Right.
Well, one of the comments came in. Walter said that there's a song called Locomotion by Little Eva, and he provided a link to be able to go hear that song. So I'm going to definitely go check that out.
That would be a fun one to put in. I'm not very good at this, and I was also hoping I could put a horse neigh in on the Frau Blucher slide, but I wasn't able to do that also. But yeah, I think whoever wrote Little Eva owns something to Locomotion No. 1, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you so much, Dutch. Like I said, your dry sense of humor and your information was just wonderful tonight. And I saw so many people laughing and having a great time with your humor. So thank you for that. It was just remarkable.
Thank you for letting me do this. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, just to close out, we do have a couple of quick notes. We did announce the dates for Conversations 2026. It's going to be April 24th through the 26th. And we are going to be changing venues to be in Indianapolis, Indiana this year. So look for more information to be coming soon on social media and on our website. As soon as we have information, we will be putting that information on those places. So be on the lookout for that. And then I have an exciting news that Dale Sanders is going to be our next presenter in October, and his presentation is called Northern Light, Creating a Portrait of BC Rail, and that will be taking place on October 14th. So be on the lookout to register for that. Elrond, I think we'll probably have that up in the coming days for registration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely in a few days we should have that up, probably by Friday for sure.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for everybody joining us tonight. We've had such a great time. Thank you again to Dutch, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.